churches often begin with a lot of unity. When a group of Christians come together to start a new church, there's a lot of excitement. Team members are overjoyed to work together, and they're often willing to make great personal sacrifices in order to accomplish the mission. There's a lot of prayer, there's a lot of faith, there's a lot of sacrifice involved. Just as happy newlyweds, though, have difficulty imagining themselves ever becoming overcome with anger and hatred toward their spouse, church planting team members are often naive about the inevitable conflict, sin, and disunity that can arise within the body when the proverbial honeymoon ends. As you lead this new church, it's important that you plan for conflict before it ever begins. Being unprepared for conflict and disunity leaves the church vulnerable to Satan's schemes and attacks. The New Testament warns us as pastors that we're to be on the lookout for wolves. Wolves are men and women who come into your new church posing as allies, but who secretly or even unconsciously have ulterior motives. They grow to be loved and trusted by you and your team, and then when you least expect it, they act divisively. As a church planter, it's your job to keep watch over your sheep and rid the flock of those with malicious or divisive motives. You've been given the honor of serving as a shepherd, and a shepherd's highest priority is to protect his sheep. Having a clear biblical leadership structure will be a critical benefit as you navigate the inevitable conflict that your church will face in the future. It's helpful to consider Paul's instruction to Titus in the formation of the church in Crete. As Paul's ministry is winding down there, he reminds his disciple of the reason he left him in Crete. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put in order what remains by appointing elders in every town. What does Paul mean when he instructs Titus to put in order what remains? He offers a clue in the last half of the verse: appoint elders in every town. It seems that Paul believes that the new Christians resulting from his evangelistic work need to be put in order and put under spiritual leadership, the spiritual leadership of an elder. In other words, the church needs to be formed out of the individual Christians. Obviously, Paul believes that evangelism isn't enough, that those who become Christians need to be organized into local churches with leadership and accountability. This is exactly what a church planter is to do, to win the lost and to shepherd the found. Church planters bring order, leadership, and accountability to Christians, the Christians that they gather and win, thus creating an environment where many people for many years can become disciples of Jesus Christ. Church planters often struggle to decide which piece of church polity to put in place first, and I want to spend a little bit of time suggesting a course of establishing biblical church polity. Now, the speed of this process will depend somewhat on the raw materials you have available to you. If you're starting a church with a pastoral partner and a team of committed Christians, you'll probably progress fairly quickly through this. But if you're working alone, it may take several years to accomplish all 5 of these pieces of biblical polity. The length of time that it takes isn't nearly as important as the quality of the decisions you make at this stage in your church's life. For me, the process from start to finish took about 3 years. Hasty, short-sighted decisions about church structure will almost always and certainly need to be corrected in the future when your group is larger and the opinions of that group are stronger. So it's important that your leadership structure is biblical, thorough, and affirmed by trusted advisors before implementation. So here's a suggested order to implementing 5 key components of church governance that will aid your church in times of crisis or disunity. First, doctrine. Unless you're a seasoned theologian or a PhD who's dedicated your life to studying theological nuances, let me encourage you not to attempt to write a belief statement. Some of the most brilliant minds in Christian history have worked through decades-long councils to form belief statements. There are dozens of excellent belief statements that churches commonly adopt as their own, and they have formed the bedrock for dozens of denominations. and they're easily accessible for your review. My church has adopted the belief statement of our denomination. It's clear and understandable and adequately thorough, but it was decided on and affirmed before anyone ever joined my new church. Second is covenant. This is where you get to do some writing. Just like the belief statement, there's a lot of church covenants out there that are available, and you can adopt or edit to fit your congregation. Church covenants are very personal vows that express the commitment that one member has to another. In this way, they're a bit like marriage vows. They should be viewed this way, really personal commitments from every member to other members. And third is membership. Membership in a church may seem unnecessarily formal or rigid in our very individualistic society, but membership is about distinction. A church member says, "This is my Christian family. I'm committed to helping these people grow in Christ, and they're committed to helping me." But why is this important? Well, because as a pastor, it will be nearly impossible for you to fulfill your responsibilities without a clear distinction between those who have submitted to your leadership and those who have not. New Testament Christians are commanded to obey their leaders and submit to them, and pastors are described as having responsibility to keep watch over the souls of those in their charge. When someone becomes a member of a church, they're formally saying, "I'm willing to submit to spiritual leadership, and I want my soul to be watched after." And this is an incredibly helpful distinction, particularly in the midst of conflict. The fourth is eldership. Since the office of an elder is a biblical one, certain biblical qualifications for spiritual maturity must be met. We see those in 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, 1 Peter 5. The Bible describes these requisite character qualities of a pastor in these passages, and these characteristics are vital for maintaining trust and respect with those you serve. And fifth, and lastly, is diaconate. In Jesus' church, it should come as no surprise that servanthood is exalted. The job of service in the church is so important, in fact, that the person fulfilling that role is expected to meet some pretty strenuous qualifications in order to have the privilege of being a servant in God's church. Unless deacons are designated to handle practical needs in the body, the most important things about the church's ministry, evangelism and preaching and counseling and prayer, may go neglected in exchange for the pressing practical needs of the moment. God thinks so highly of service in the church that he reserves the most menial tasks for those with the best character. When people in your new church dedicate themselves to serving the body, they're imitating Christ, who willingly took on the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of men. So to recap, doctrine. Adopt a statement of faith that clearly and concisely communicates your new church's beliefs. Covenant. Write a set of vows that members are expected to keep with one another. Membership. Institute a formal distinction between those who simply attend your worship gatherings and those who consider themselves family with one another. Eldership. Examine and affirm elders to join you in the shepherding of the congregation. And diaconate. Select qualified servants who will handle the daily, practical, organizational, and administrative needs of the church in order to free you and your elders to focus on the ministry of the word and prayer. So again, my suggested pathway for establishing church polity is doctrine, covenant, membership, eldership, diaconate. Establishing these components of biblical polity in the beginning of your church plant will not ensure that you never have conflict or confusion or disruption in your new church. But neglecting to implement these components will ensure that when that inevitable difficulty does arise, that you're not prepared for it. So let me encourage you to establish biblical polity from the very beginning.